guys, my name is Cassie and I am the creator of Pieces of Scrap, and today I wanted to do a video kind of going over different free Instagram patterns and whether or not they are worth trying. And as you can see behind me, I've done a lot of work prepping for this video. I've tested a lot of patterns. Some of them I tested more than once. Some of them I kind of tested more than once because I've been prepping them for market prep for about a month or so now, so I've been well versed in some of these patterns, whereas some of these patterns are much newer to me. And that's why I kind of wanted to go over which patterns are worth it and which ones are not, so that when you're trying to figure out what you want to market prep, you have a better idea of what is worth your time and what's not. But before we get into today's video, I need to give a brief shout out to today's sponsor, Crochet Box. If you have friends who are interested in learning how to crochet, this is the perfect gift for them because it comes with everything that they need to get started. And it comes with not only written instructions, but also video instructions that you can watch in case you ever get stuck in any of the instructions and you're not really sure what you're supposed to do. I know that sometimes getting into a hobby like this is kind of daunting because you have to think about all the different things you need to buy, all the different hook sizes that you may need, all this yarn that you may need, but every box comes with everything you need to make one Amigurumi toy. So it's a lot less daunting than coming up with a shopping list of things that you need to even get started. But what I really appreciate about this kit specifically is that not only does it come with everything you need to make this plushie, but it comes with a beginner-friendly handbook with step-by-step guides about how to do basic stitches that you would need for not only this project, but for any other crochet project that you may want to do in the future. So if you're looking to give the gift of crochet to somebody this holiday season or for a birthday or whatever you have coming up, Crochet Box is a really, really good idea, and I appreciate them sponsoring this video today. So the first pattern that I tested was Ted the Thick Toad by Canadian Rue and Crochet. This pattern I did a little bit differently than what it says in their instructions. I didn't completely complete the pattern, I guess, because I didn't add the butt cheeks on the back. I don't think it really needs it, and I think it's a little inappropriate, to be honest. Anyway, I really like making this pattern. It whips up so quickly. And as you can see, I have two different sizes right here. It's not a stuffing thing. I made this one using a 5mm hook, which I think is what she asks you to use in the instructions. And then this one I used a 3.5mm hook, so it works up a little bit smaller. Anyway, I rate this pattern 4.5 stars out of 5. Next up, we have a very new to me pattern. Some of these patterns that I'm showing are going to be patterns that I've used quite a bit, and then some of them are very new. This is probably the newest pattern out of all of these to me, and I've made 2 of these over the weekend because I'm just completely obsessed with the pattern. This is the Kaylee Crochet Brontosaur pattern, and I just completely love it. It's completely no-sew. As you can see, I kind of fudged the eye placement on this one. I think the eye placement on this one is a lot better, which is actually where it's supposed to go according to her pattern. I just like completely missed the spot on this one. My notes about this pattern, the only thing that really made me stumble a bit was at row 6 in the pattern. The wording kind of tripped me up, and honestly, now that I look back at it, I have no idea why. I think I was just thinking to myself, what could we possibly be doing here? And it was really confusing to me, but now that I look back, it makes a lot more sense, and I'm not stumbling on that part of the pattern the second time around. The only other thing that kind of tripped me up was in the instructions at row 6, she tells you to stitch mark 2 stitches specifically, and it really confused me about why we were placing those stitch markers because it's not really noted later in the pattern why you placed them. You work the legs in pairs and then you sew them together so that they're all one piece, and the stitch markers are there to tell you where you're supposed to slip stitch. And it doesn't say that in the pattern anywhere, which I think is why I was confused, and it took me a minute to kind of figure it out. I ended up just counting the stitches in between those stitch markers because in the pattern it says to slip stitch 15 stitches, and I was like, where in the pattern am I supposed to slip stitch? And I kind of just figured it out on my own. That was the only thing that tripped me up in the pattern, and now that I've done it a bunch, a bunch meaning 2 times, but I'm just completely obsessed with it now. And I would give this pattern also a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next pattern that I did is the Mini Elephant by Emmy Toys. This took me about 48 minutes to work up, so not very long, and I could see myself doing it a little faster since this is my first go around doing this and I didn't make a second one yet. The only thing that I don't really like about it is that the ears, you have to sew them on, but they are cute. The pattern was really detailed and really helpful. She provides pictures on each slide of the pattern to show you what you're doing and what it's supposed to look like, which was really helpful. That being said, I would also give this pattern a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have the Strawberry Turtle by Hippie Stitch Co. And this took me an hour and 9 minutes to make. The second time I went around, I made a smaller one using a different hook size. This pattern, the first go around, caused me a lot of problems because I had only been working with Parfait chunky yarn a couple times and I wasn't familiar with how easily the yarn will break when you're embroidering things or fastening things closed. Stuff like that, and I kept breaking my yarn when I was sewing the fins on or the head on, and it was just really frustrating. I feel like that is partially why I don't have super good feelings about this pattern, but overall it's really cute. I think this pattern can be really easily adapted into regular turtles if you don't embroider the shell with the seeds or add the leaves on top of the turtle. The only thing that I think this is lacking is some instructions about stuffing the head or something about how you're supposed to attach the head or where you're supposed to attach the head, because something I struggled with is if you're supposed to attach it below and just completely ignore the shell so the head would be underneath the shell instead of on top of both. Right now I have it connected over the shell and the body kind of equally, and I did that and I made that decision because I was referencing the photo a lot, but there's not really anything in the instructions about where you're supposed to sew on the head or the fins for that matter, so it was kind of hard to kind of determine where I wanted to place things. The second go around was a little easier. It still took the same amount of time regardless of the hook size changing and it looking smaller. It takes the same amount of time to make this, but there's not as much gaping. I like the shape of the shell a little more, and I think his head came out a little cuter because the stitches weren't as far apart, and so it stuffed a little better this time. But overall, I think this pattern deserves a 4 out of 5 stars. It's a really, really good try at making a really cute turtle, and I think a lot of my disgruntled attitude didn't have anything to do with the pattern and actually had to do with the fact that I was using Parfait chunky yarn for the first time. Next up is the duck, or as I like to call in every video that I've had so far, the duckling by Crochet by Pat, and this pattern took me about 27 minutes, give or take. The only thing that this pattern is really lacking is better instructions about where you're supposed to embroider the feet on. As you can kind of tell here, I have his feet kind of lopsided, like this one's way taller than this one, and every single time I embroider feet, this is like the third one I've made ever. Every time I embroider feet, I kind of have to do some guesswork, and I will like thread my needle through to the outside to place where the stitch is going to be, and then I end up going back in the same hole I went through to kind of relocate where the stitch is going to be. And I wish that there wasn't as much guesswork involved in that process, because it takes a lot of time trying to figure out where the feet are supposed to go, and it's really frustrating when this happens. I could easily fix this just by cutting the yarn and re-embroidering in the right spot, but I just wish there was a little bit more instruction about where to place them. That being said, I give this pattern 4 stars out of 5. Next up, we have the very infamous Chunky Mushroom Boy by Chunky Crochet. This takes me about 35 minutes, but as I said earlier, once I get started making like a whole batch of these, I get going faster and faster and faster because I'm used to the pattern, and it had been a little bit since I made this pattern. And something that also messed me up was, for some reason, every single time I get to row 7, I like fasten off, even though it doesn't tell you to fasten off. There's another row after row 7 in the cap before you switch colors. And so for whatever reason, I got to row 9 where you start the white on the inside of the cap, and I realized I was missing part of the cap because it wasn't overlaying as much. It was kind of just like sticking out a little bit. Another thing is I have made this pattern using a different hook. I think I used like a 5mm hook the first couple times, and so they come out a lot bigger. This is with a 3.5mm hook, and I think he's a lot cuter at this size. He's a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to handle, and he doesn't look like as chunky. He's still pretty chunky for a mushroom, and I really like this size. I think I prefer the smaller chunky mushrooms over the larger chunky mushrooms. The only gripe I have with this pattern is because it's worked in a spiral, the cap comes out a little lopsided. The recommendation that I would kind of make is for the cap only, I would probably work in the round instead of working in a spiral, so that you won't have to like slip stitch a couple times at the end of the cap to make sure that the brim isn't obviously lopsided. That being said, I give this pattern a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Guys, we're finally getting into the stuff that's in my background, and I'm sure you know what's coming since you see what's missing back there. It's the Baby Cow by Kosinka Handmade. I hope I'm saying that right. This takes me about 2 hours to make. It takes a little longer if you end up making a purse or a bag or whatever you want to call it for the little guy. This strawberry actually doesn't come in the pattern. This is my own pattern right here that I kind of improvised to add on to this because I thought it's a cute little strawberry themed, like strawberry milk cow or something like that. But I think this is a really easy pattern for somebody who is well versed in crochet. My only problem with it, as you can probably kind of see a little bit of a difference in the neck on each of these ones. For this one, I didn't follow instructions, and I fastened off and sewed the hole closed of both the head and the body, and you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to keep it open, and as you can see on the strawberry cow, it looks a lot nicer. This kind of looks like a balloon, the way that it looks like his neck is kind of tied to his body. But if you just follow the instructions like you're supposed to, it looks a lot nicer. The only gripe that I have with this pattern is that the arms and tail are not no-sew, but I kind of adapted the pattern based on experiences I've had with other patterns to kind of make it no-sew. So instead of sewing these on, I kind of just single crocheted through the arm in row 17, and I kind of had to use my best judgment to place where they were supposed to go before I would stitch them in. And then for the tail, I just chained however many it says to chain in the pattern to make the tail directly off of a single crochet stitch, and then single crocheted back, and then into the next stitch I single crocheted, and then just kept going as normal. And then I just placed one single crochet into the middle of the tail in the next row, and that way you don't have to sew on a tail later, which is awesome. Those are really easy ways to adapt this pattern so that it's no-sew for the most part. The only thing then you would have to sew on are the ears, the horns, and the head to the body. And then that's a lot less sewing that you have to do, not worrying about arms or the tail. So that being said, I would give this pattern a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really, really like it, and the more that I do it, I just really like how the cows look, and they're so cute and they're so popular right now. Lastly, we kind of have to end on a bad note because this is the pattern I like least out of all of them. This pattern caused me the most problems, and I had to edit the pattern so much to make it work because I didn't want to scrap the whole thing because it wasn't working. This pattern I would not recommend you trying if you don't know what you're doing. This is the Bear in Overalls pattern by Loretta Loops. I think part of what my problem is with this pattern is that I don't have Bernat blanket yarn, and that's what she uses to make this pattern. Single crochets in Bernat blanket are probably much taller single crochets than they are in Parfait Chunky, hence why the head of my bears looks so drastically different from the head of her bear in her reference photo. And this pattern took me an hour and a half, but if I'm being completely honest, first time going around, it took me 3 hours to complete this bear because I had no idea what I was supposed to do to fix some of the problems I was having. And I'll kind of list off some of the problems I was having. If you look at the photo in the free pattern, you can see the legs, but you can't see that the overalls are longer than the legs. So I made my pattern so that you do not crochet, I think, 2 rows of the starting part of the overalls, because that way you can actually see his little stubby legs underneath. Another problem I had is when I finished the body of my bear, it seemed like it was way too short. So I ended up adding another row of single crochet onto the last row. And to be honest, it still just doesn't quite look right on this one. I did the same exact thing. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe in my frustration, I added an additional row to this one, not just the one single crochet row that I added, but maybe an additional one to make it look like his torso is a little taller, because this guy's torso looks taller than this guy's torso. The other thing is the muzzle is just like completely way too small in Parfait Chunky if you're following her instructions. So I did 2 different muzzles for this one. I think I added like an extra row of single crochet, but for this one I like completely reworked it and I still don't even like what it looks like. And then another thing is the ears are like hollow little circles, like circle cups that you're supposed to sew on his head, but I ended up just folding them in half and single crocheting across so that it seals it, and then sewing them on. So that way it would have one less thing that I needed to stuff and then sew on and try to keep all the stuffing inside. And that's something else that I didn't like. The muzzle, it doesn't tell you to stuff the muzzle when you sew it on, and I think it might be because that burnout blanket yarn that she's using has a lot more structure to it than Parfait Chunky yarn. Last but not least, which I already mentioned and griped about at the very beginning of introducing this pattern, the head just doesn't look anything like the head that she made it. And this is 2 separate tries of trying to make the head look like it's supposed to. This one kind of looks like a turnip upside down or something like that. Like that's the head shape of this one, and this one is just, I don't even know what this head shape is. It's smashed oval. I'm just not happy. I'm not happy about how this turned out. And I'm sure that if you actually worked the pattern in burnout blanket yarn like it says to, maybe it would come out a little better because of the taller stitches, but if you're trying to work this in Parfait Chunky, don't, because it's just too hard. It's too hard to figure out, and I don't want to have to edit somebody's pattern as I'm working it to make it work for me and potentially make it into something that can sell, because honestly, I don't know if anybody's ever going to think these are cute enough to buy. They're just kind of ugly, especially knowing what they're supposed to look like. That being said, I'm going to try being very nice and give this a 3 out of 5 stars. If I was gonna completely ignore the fact that I used the wrong yarn, or a yarn that it was not intended to be used with, I would probably rate it lower, because I just had a terrible time making it. And honestly, I don't even know why I tried to make it a second time. I think it was honestly just so I could time myself and give you guys an idea of how long it takes you to make once you kind of know what you're doing. But to be fair, it took me 3 hours the first time because I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know how to fix it. So that's that. So there it is. I would recommend all of these patterns except for bear and overalls, only if you are not using the yarn that she suggests that you use in the pattern. I don't know how it works up in burnout blanket. I don't have any burnout blanket yarn that I can work with for this pattern. So that is to be seen by somebody else. Let me know if you've tried this pattern and didn't have problems with it. Let me know if you feel the same as me and are just so frustrated about that pattern, and I will just give you a hug. I'll give you an online hug in the comments, because man, it was hard. If you liked this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up and leave a comment down below about what you liked, what you didn't like. I'm always trying to improve my videos, and I will see you guys next time.